welcome to another episode of What's on the Pile. I'm Nathan Besner, and joining me is Shane Lee,
Hey, what's up?
Jane Belcastro,
Hello.
Matt Wagner,
It's Wagner.
and Jenner.
And Jenner.
This time, we're discussing Jim Cummings' werewolf horror comedy? The Wolf of Snow Hollow. But first, we're going to talk about our favorite portrayals of the classic Universal monsters in recognition of tonight's movie. Let's talk about werewolves first. This is one of my pet genres. I love
Mine
werewolf
too.
movies. Yeah.
Yep.
Same.
Yeah.
Same.
There are generally three big ones that come to mind when discussing the genre, and that's American Werewolf in London, The Howling, and
Mhm.
the original Wolfman. Those
Yeah.
to me are kind of the holy grails, which were also referenced by by Rob Schraub in his episode of Creepshow, the new one. It was really, really well done. But we hear about those three movies a lot, so I'm wondering what are your all's actual favorites? I see Wagner has one already.
So, Catherine Isabella in Ginger Snaps.
That was going to be mine.
Yeah.
That's the only one I
Yeah,
can think
that's way the hell up there.
It is. I mean, I picked when I started collecting movies, I picked that up as a blind buy, not knowing anything about it, and it doesn't have a great cover on it either. But Catherine Isabella is so good in that movie, just showing the progression into this sort of feral state, and it's just a really good story as well, and it sort of led to me following her around the genre, trying to see other movies she was in. The only time she really ever had another star turn, though, was with American Mary, which is also very good, but not for the faint of heart.
What was that Netflix show? The Order. She had a major supporting role in The Order, which ironically she ended up on the non-werewolf side of things, which I think may have actually been a little bit of in-joke casting there. But fantastic actress, and yeah, Ginger Snaps. The entire trilogy kind of made her an instant cult icon. The whole trilogy is fantastic. I particularly think that the second one and the prequel are, if anything, underrated.
Mm-hmm.
The prequel in particular, as one of relatively few period werewolf movies that I can point to, is particularly impressive.
And I will add one runner up, because I did not understand the assignment, so I thought we were picking our favorite actors who portrayed the individual monsters.
You could think about it that way, yeah.
So I have an honorable mention for Oliver Reed.
Dude,
not for the werewolf movie he was in, but under my assertion, Oliver Reed has always played a werewolf in every film he's been in.
I was going to mention Curse of the Werewolf, which has actually been on our list for the show for a while, but
I haven't seen.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, absolutely fantastic performance. But you're right. By all accounts, the man was as close to a legit lycanthrope as ever walked the planet.
Mm-hmm.
But we loved him for it. We miss him.
Yes.
He is still
yes.
Profoundly missed. But Curse of the Werewolf, even as one of his earlier performances, is one of the. It's one of the Hammer films where if you know, you know. You either love it or you haven't seen it.
Yeah.
It's just a fantastic film, and if anything, has more of a claim to primacy in the genre by being based on, however loosely, the novel The Werewolf of Paris by Guillaume Dore, as even more classical, arguably, than its antecedents from Universal.
Jen? I know you're a fan of the werewolves.
What, me?
Oh,
Yeah.
Jane?
Oh,
Jane,
yeah.
Jane,
Okay,
sorry.
so, I guess when it comes to, you guys have kind of already named all my favorites, but what is, Jenner, is it Werewolves Within? Is that the one that...
Werewolves Within. Yes, that was
Yes.
that was the other snowy werewolf movie from the last couple of years.
Yeah, we
that,
watched those two kind of close together, so I kind of got them mixed up in my head until we watched that. But that is it's comedy.
If we were still
doing fun,
if we were still doing double features, that would definitely have been a sort of natural pairing for general atmosphere, aside from being released in relatively close proximity. But that was a ton of fun. That was probably the best werewolf whodunit since Howling 5.
Yeah, it's good fun. And also, I know this isn't a movie, but the now I can't remember. I'm blanking. What was that show that had on Netflix? It started with an H, and it had the great werewolf transformation on it. That
Hemlock Grove.
Hemlock
Oh.
Grove.
Not a great show, but it did have
Fantastic
some
werewolf.
fantastic
Yeah.
werewolf effects.
Yeah, it did. It was so brutal. I loved it. I loved it. That whole story was also very good werewolf lore as well, and I really liked that. And of course, we have to mention the werewolves, not swearwolves.
Yeah.
Which was supposed to be a show, right? Is that still going to happen?
Supposedly, they still have it on some burner. Maybe not the back, but certainly not the front.
Well, now, especially since Our Flag Means Death was popular.
Yeah, no. At this point, Rhys Darby has a lot more cachet than he did a couple of years ago, so that might happen yet. Actually, as far as recent material goes, a particular shout out to, in the spirit of not exactly werewolf movies, a la Wolfen, the other wolf movie from 1981 after American Werewolf in London, the recent film The Cursed, which was released early this year, in which the trailer made it look like animate scarecrows versus werewolves, which it wasn't exactly, is a really, really fantastic movie with something that is like a werewolf, but not exactly. But it is one of the more original monster creations in recent movies. It's a film that I can't recommend enough.
Well, my personal favorite is Pedestrian. My personal favorite werewolf himself is American Werewolf in London. David Naughton is my favorite, just because of the pathos he brings to the werewolf legend. He does it so well.
Yeah, no, we kind of pre-passed that one. American Werewolf in London is one of those movies whose reputation increases on a year-over-year basis.
And is always justified.
Just because of, I mean, again, one of those movies that was received with a little bit of a head scratch at the time, not least for the gleefully abrupt ending.
Oh, my favorite ending.
It's like, when the story's over, the story's fucking over. As I said, I think using that as a reference point when we talked about Vampire's Kiss. It's kind of the most perfect encapsulation of sort of the classical construction of the werewolf myth, which is that if you're a werewolf, you kill or you die. And once you die, you're dead. It's not like Dracula, where a vial of blood can bring your ashes back to life. It's it is, this is this is the disease that concludes you.
Well, David Naughton was my absolute first crush. Right after that was Sting,
Were you a pepper?
I was a pepper, and yes, wouldn't you like to be a pepper too? And he did that dance, and he clicked his heels in the air, and it was great. I just thought he was the best. But because I had seen that movie, really was the main thing, and that's probably the beginning of my love of werewolf.
I mean, shout-outs for Naughton for transitioning back to the small screen the following year for a very underappreciated TV vampire movie called I Desire. Which was itself one of the less appreciated entries in sort of the 70s to 80s sexy vampire cycle. Naughton was not the sexy vampire, but he remained there, as in American Werewolf in London, an absolutely affable lead. And it always feels like a little bit of a pity that the last time I can remember seeing him in anything was My Sister Sam. Relatively obscure at this point 80s sitcom. It always felt like he should have had more of a career than he did, and I know that's a line that I come back to a lot, but particularly for someone who is, again, as much of a cult icon at this point as Naughton is, just on the basis of that one movie, it feels more relevant than usual.
Another werewolf movie I love is Dog Soldiers.
Oh,
I
Oh
think
Yes,
yeah.
that
completely
yes,
one.
forgot. You
absolutely
love
I
that one.
fantastic movie.
I think
So
that
good.
that one has some of the best upright mobility of werewolves in makeup effects wise in the genre. Way better than Underworld.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yes,
I don't think Underworld had any idea what it was doing. My only problem with Dog Soldiers is they always struck me as being a little top heavy, just
Hmm.
because of all the prosthetics on the upper body, and they didn't. I mean, if they had bulked up the rest of the actor, they wouldn't have been able to do anything. So they definitely made the right choice. But if you step back and get a good shot of one of them, most of the weight is up above the shoulders there.
Yeah, there is
They're
a lot
like
of weight there, but
bulldogs.
I like it.
mad shout outs to Spoonie as having one of the all-time great supporting character deaths in motion picture history. Spitting his gum in the werewolf's mouth and saying, "I hope I'll give you indigestion."
I always took that one as just one of the great flights from the battle moment in which they are chased upstairs. They close the door, they barricade the door, they get into the closet, the wardrobe, then they go through the bottom of the wardrobe into the kitchen downstairs. You've got to imagine the werewolves are like, oh, for fuck's sake.
To say nothing of being a lot of our introductions to the great Liam Cunningham, one of the absolute master baritone voices who we've learned to appreciate more and more with every subsequent role.
Anybody have any other werewolf movies we haven't heard about?
Oh,
I know I've mentioned Bad Moon before. Has anybody even heard of that movie?
I have heard of it.
I
I've
can
never
picture the
actually
cover.
seen it.
I know
I've
I know
seen.
That was
yeah,
the
I've heard
Michael
of it.
Pare movie, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
No,
think-
I've never
I think
actually
I've-
seen it.
Yeah.
I heard very mediocre things about it at the time, but it
Oh no,
seems
it's not
to,
very good.
It seems to have developed a little bit of a cult following, again, sort of because of rather than in spite of its mediocrity since then.
I might
Yeah.
give that one another watch because I saw that in the theater, but it's been so long that I don't remember anything about it except that I did not like it.
I mean, we've pretty much covered all of the sort
All
of
the majors.
acknowledged masterworks of the field at this point.
I mean, we have to roll down the Howlings. Number 1 is great. Number 2 is kind of a trash classic.
Two is great because Sybil Danning in leather
Mhm.
and Christopher Lee. Not too long after a cop in Los Angeles pulled him over and asked him if it was okay for him to be driving around in daylight. That
Three
actually
is-
happened.
3 is
Nice.
Gonzo Bizarro with the marsupials.
Yeah.
4 I actually don't remember.
4 is kind of like a zero-budget 3-character remake of the first one.
Mm.
Weirdly enough, directed by
Okay.
the director of Twins of Evil, but even then, not his strongest work. 5 is actually really freaking good.
5 is great. 5 is an
Fi-
honest to God the whodunit in an abandoned castle.
Yeah, 5 is, and then there were none in
Mhm.
in a Romanian castle. It just has mad atmosphere. Not really, I mean, an earnest, semi-professional cast of people that we never really saw again, as far as I can recall. But still, a really nifty little movie, just for a very unique atmosphere.
And of course, 6 was finally, at 6, we get Vampire versus Werewolf, which is the first freaking time in a movie series about werewolves that they acknowledge the existence of vampires, too.
Yeah.
And I think that they got 5 solid movies without having to mention anybody else supernatural. I think that says something right there. But
Do want to take a moment here to shout out to, I believe it was sometime in the 1940s, John Brom, who is better known for having directed the 40s versions of The Lodger and Hangover Square, made a fantastic werewolf movie called The Undying Monster.
Ooh.
It might have been 1939. It was after Werewolf of London, but before The Wolfman. Last I saw it, it was in a 20th Century Fox horror box set, but it's definitely worth hunting up, just for having mad atmosphere, passable werewolf effects, but again, it was approaching it more as sort of a whodunit type deal. Again, one of those movies, indeed one of those directors who isn't talked about nearly enough.
Well, why don't we move on from Wolfman and
Move over to Dracula's.
yeah, let's get some Draculas out there.
I would just like to voice my approval for starting on Wolfman, because that has always been where I start. So prefer them over vampires.
I do too. Yeah.
I'm like I say, I like why not both, but at the same time, I'm definitely fall just a little bit more on the vampires side of that particular razor.
I recognize that vampire movies are by and large better than what we get out of werewolf movies.
Yes. Werewolf movies usually have to put so much of the budget into the prosthetics and the effects. And even then, I mean, the low budget ones are making do with what they can, and you end up with a great deal of large shaggy carpets attacking.
You mean a werewolf?
Yeah,
Oh,
werewolf.
where are you?
Yeah. And vampire stories, technically all they have to do is get a couple of plastic teeth, which we all know is at $2.59 at the local Chinese store.
or else give it time, they could just cast Jim Cummings, but we'll circle back on that. No, vampires are easier, but there are also, and frankly, this goes back to adolescent and pre-adolescent predilections on my part. They're easier to do sexy.
Well, if it's a Carmilla,
I was about exactly. Sexy vampire.
He's there.
Is
He's
like,
there.
Yeah, sexy vampire says yeah, and sexy werewolf provokes a distinct moment of cognitive dissonance.
Lady Hawk's the closest they get to that.
Yeah. Oh,
or Sybil Danning and Howling too. But
well, I have a favorite Dracula. It's probably not anybody else's, nor will it ever be, but it was my first, and that is George Hamilton.
Nice.
Love at first bite.
Oh,
I love
think,
that movie so much.
I think George Hamilton is kind of the Nintendo Switch of Dracula's, in that he's like everybody's third favorite. And I mean, at least who's seen it, because that movie is an absolute delight.
It is. It's so much fun.
It has been decades since I've seen it. Is that the one where the jealous boyfriend rushes into the restaurant and says, "The second way to kill a vampire, 3 silver bullets straight through the heart, blam, blam, blam." And then Dracula says, "No, that is for a werewolf." Really? A werewolf? Don't worry, everybody. He's fine. This is for a werewolf. He's a vampire.
That's absolutely... Yeah, that was Richard Benjamin. Yeah. Children of the night, shut up! I mean, it has been way too long since I've seen that, but it remains, even in some of those little moments like that, endlessly quotable and endlessly memorable. So I as a non-vampire guy, I can absolutely see that being your favorite, Dracula specifically.
Yeah.
As Jane was observed correctly, my pet vampire, so to speak, is Carmilla, or I suppose my vampire waifu, if you want to put it that way. In basically every iteration that she's ever received, with the possible exception of the old lady from Carl Theodor Dreyer's Vampire, although Sybil Schmitz was weirdly hot in that. Not the old lady, but the sister who was afflicted with vampirism. But as far as Dracula's specifically, just for the sheer length of ground he covered, not just in the Hammer movies, but also in Jess Franco's El Conde Dracula and Eduardo Molinaro's Dracula and Son, which was absolutely Baudelarized in its U.S. release, but is an absolute pip in its original French version. Christopher Goddamn Lee. Nobody else comes close.
Well, yeah, I mean, but I just love Gary Oldman and the.
Gary Oldman is awesome. He'd legitimately be my number 2, but Christopher Lee just owns.
I know that he's your guy.
Yeah,
it's cool.
He's my guy, and
he's your guy.
He absolutely owned the role for damn near 3 decades. I mean, good Lord, he appeared in The Magic Christian, and that was a comedy.
Did finally get around to it. That is. Ugh.
Well, does anybody else have a
Yeah.
favorite Dracula?
So I've got one, which I'm also willing is also my first. I'm also willing to bet it's no one's favorite, and I don't even know who played him. I'm looking it up right now. So
You name the movie, and I'll tell you who
yeah.
played Dracula.
First of all, I admit I do not have much experience with Universal monsters, but this one movie was my formative introduction to all of them, and that's the Monster Squad. And
You're
that is
right.
the
I
only,
don't know who played Dracula.
and he's played
in
by
the
a man
Monster
named
Squad.
Duncan Rieger.
That's
and this
right.
movie,
That's
and
right.
he's
That's right.
really the only one that was really a character in that movie, I'll admit. Although apparently Tom Noonan played Frankenstein's monster,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I have not seen that movie in a long time. I don't know if it's any good at all. I do remember
It is good.
It's a lot of fun.
I
It
remember
is
putting
genuine.
Yeah.
I remember putting it on a few years ago. We put it on in the background when my friend and I were just playing video games in my place, and we kept turning our heads because they kept dropping not the F bomb, not fuck, but the other F word, the slur, like nonstop. It was like
Yeah.
shocking.
Okay.
We kept every like 2 minutes. We were like, did he just say that again? Oh my god! This movie's
Yeah.
PG-13. Came out in the late '80s, early '90s, I guess, or '87.
They had
Um,
Kevin's brother from the Wonder Years
Wonder
say
Years,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
What's his name? Oh god, I know his name.
Yeah, I'm
It
drawing
doesn't
a
matter.
blank on it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was my introduction to Dracula, the Wolfman, the Mummy, Frankenstein.
I mean, Monster Squad is it. I mean, it's right there with like Goonies in my memory.
Yeah,
Honestly,
that's
for
how
many
I
of the
think of
same
it too.
reasons. I do not have the breadth of a lot of people on vampire movies. Just because there's so many of them.
Oh, it was written by Shane Black, by the way. I didn't know that.
And-
Screenplay by Shane Black,
Yeah.
directed by Fred Dekker. Of course, more recently,
Yeah.
Shane Black directed The Predator, which was co-written by him and Fred Dekker.
Yep.
Mhm. But
Black has become more of a director. Dekker has become less of a director,
so
which is
for
a pity
mine,
because Dekker was fantastic. I thought.
for my favorite Dracula, I actually go back to the start, and I'd say Max Schreck
Nice.
in
Nice.
Nosferatu, which that is Dracula. The only reason it's not Dracula is because of a lawsuit and the early days of trying to figure out who had the rights to do what with what.
It also
The man
invented
is-
the vampires are killed by daylight.
Yes, it did.
It did. It did. I mean, there's a lot of things that were invented by that film, but just for the performance, Max Schreck himself, I thought was genuinely one of the creepiest of the original silent eras. So I really loved his performance there, and I'm not attempting to say it usurps Christopher Lee, but I really haven't seen that many of Christopher Lee's, honestly.
And you know what?
Special shout out also to Klaus Kinski in Herzog's remake.
Yeah.
Which was one of the first movies that didn't have a U.S. release that I hunted up a bootleg of back in the VHS era, and is still probably my single favorite vampire movie, unless you count Life Force.
And here's another one. I actually saw Shadow of the Vampire before I saw Nosferatu. Shadow of the Vampire, also a very good, I guess, technically a vampire movie.
Yeah.
Since it posits that Shrek was a vampire, starring the great Willem Dafoe as Max Shrek, and at the time, I don't even think I knew about Nosferatu. I thought it was a completely fictional movie. I mean, it's a fictional movie, so I didn't know that it referenced a real movie that was made at the time.
No, Nosferatu is absolutely. Both versions of Nosferatu are absolutely great. I cannot wait to see what happens when Eggers and his people get their shit together and do a second remake. Mostly because having seen The Northman, I have, and frankly, The Witch and.
The Lighthouse?
The Lighthouse. I have absolute faith in Robert Eggers' ability to pull that off.
Do you have a favorite Dracula, Jane?
Well, I just said Bram Stoker's Dracula.
That's right.
Gary
That's
Oldman.
right. Gary Oldman.
But I mean, if we're talking about vampires in general, of course, I have to say What We Do in the Shadows, both the show and the movie. Just love them. I'm also thinking one of the things I really loved back in the day was there was some vampire movie with Grace Jones. Do you
Vamp.
Yeah. I love that movie. I watched it every chance I got back in the 80s. So
unfortunately, that hasn't had a decent U.S. release in ages, so I keep missing it during its brief video release windows. It keeps going out of print and keeps fetching collector's prices. So I haven't gotten around to getting a copy of that, but I really do need to.
Yeah. And straight up, I like what the one that we are always slamming on, but God,
Twilight?
No, I hate Twilight.
I
But
don't know.
the one with the vampires and the werewolves, we just talked about it.
Underworld?
Underworld. I liked Underworld. I was just fine with it.
The first Underworld,
little
I actually
disappointed
thought was a
in-
lot of fun. The sequels were deeply.
Yeah, the first one was great. I loved it. But
Also
I will
established
say-
that vampires don't sweat because running around in PVC in the rain and what looks like 80-degree weather, she would have
It's a
been
bad
swimming.
idea. Yeah, it was probably latex actually, but
Yeah,
And,
under film lights, that's still going to give you a frickin' force field of BO. I don't care how I don't care how nice you smell the rest of the time.
and the vampire interview with the vampire movie wasn't bad. I wasn't completely correct, but a lot of aspects of it were really great, and
I'm
I
actually
loved
going
the books.
I am actually going to take a moment out here to shout out to one of the greatest and probably one of the queerest, if not the queerest, vampire movies ever made, the original Fright Night.
Yes, okay, I was going to mention that
although
too.
the remake of Fright Night was actually really good, and I consider the first movie that was called Fright Night Part 2 to be rather underrated. I kind of liked the second movie to be called Fright Night Part 2, even though it was unrelated to its predecessor, but it was definitely a lot weaker.
Well, the first Fright Night 2 is still lost in like copyright issues, right?
Yeah, no, like I say, it's one of those things that passes through streaming services periodically, but kind of an underrated movie. It was kind of dinged at the time as being sort of more of the same, but I still found it fairly entertaining. But the original is again one of those movies that improves with age.
All right. Well, we're gonna have to do a bonus round for the last 3 Universal horror creatures because we're almost out of time. We've got. I'll give you my next 3. The Frankensteins would be Patrick Bergin and Randy Quaid from the 1992 TV movie for me. Nice. I love that movie. I thought it was a fantastic portrayal of Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster in the text. The creature is boring for me because it's just the Monster Squad creature. I love it. I haven't seen The Shape of Water, so I still need to see that. Man. That'll probably be my favorite creature. But
it's Doug Jones.
Yeah,
it's Doug Jones.
I'll say great creature, okay movie in my opinion.
I really liked the movie.
I liked it.
I remember Nate's mother and I both didn't love it.
I'm more with Shane, but I mean Doug Jones. All the way on that film.
Yeah.
I liked it. It was weird.
And then the last big one is The Mummy. For me, I have put in a pity vote for Arnold Vosloo, simply because I don't feel like fake Darkman gets enough praise.
Vosloo
from?
Darkman 2 and 3.
Wait, there's Darkman really? 2 and 3?
Yes, there's a Darkman 2 and 3.
What the fuck?
And Darkman was played by Arnold Vosloo.
Oh, that's what you weren't talking about the Mummy movies? He played Wait, hang on.
He played Darkman.
He also played the Mummy.
Okay, I thought you were talking. I thought you were talking about the Brendan Fraser Mummy movies.
I was.
I didn't realize they were. Okay.
No, Vosloo is fantastic. I have to go with Karloff. That's. I mean, granted that they even kind of dinged it at the time for basically being a remake of Dracula from the year before. Karloff's Mummy was one of the greatest vampire performances ever done. Yes, absolutely, with The Shape of Water on the Gill Man. As far as Frankenstein himself, Peter Cushing was the absolute colossus of that. Basically, he did for the Frankenstein movies what Christopher Lee did for the Dracula movies, except even then he was articulate all the way through. And there is a genuine and somewhat terrifying character arc all the way through all of the pictures where Cushing played Frankenstein. It's probably my vote for the single greatest serial performance in the history of horror films. And I do not say that lightly. As far as the monster, actually, a shout out or a runner-up shout out to Kenneth Branagh's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which I actually think is really underrated. As far as the monster, again, I have to go with Karloff, but specifically Karloff in The Bride of Frankenstein. Although to some extent in the original Frankenstein as well.
All right, who's next? We have 30 seconds.
I'm going to abstain because y'all have all mentioned all my favorites. So go ahead.
Yeah, I don't
Yep.
have anything to add to any of these monsters.
Oh, okay. Well, then I will go quickly. Frankenstein, Peter Boyle from Young Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Honestly, a good performance anyway.
Yes.
Creature, Doug Jones,
Frankenstein.
because of course. And the Mummy, of course, is Paul Badger.
Paul Badger.
Which,
I don't know.
Yeah,
that
I know.
one.
All of you look at me
Oh,
blank.
actually, I was going to make a special shout out to the Aztec Mummy franchise, but we're almost out of time.
Yeah.
Who is Paul Badger?
Paul Badger played the Mummy in the Waxworks movie.
Nice.
Probably one of the best Mummy sequences, and honestly, I don't feel like I have enough of experience with the other Mummy franchises.
Mummy
I didn't
movies-
like the modern Mummy ones very much.
Yeah, mummy movies come across rarely enough that it's easy for them to slip by. I have, frankly, a distinct backlog of them at this point. I still need to see The Eternal Kiss of the Mummy, which is that rarest of thing in Irish bog mummy movies with Christopher Walken in it. I still need to see the Mummy segment of the 13-hour Argentinian film La Flor, which is the first segment of the thing is a Mummy movie, and by all accounts, it's amazing. Of course, it's also a 13-hour movie, so that's a pretty substantial time commitment. I would shout out as far as underappreciated Mummy movies that I have seen. Russell Mulcahy's Talos the Mummy, a.k.a. Tale of the Mummy in its Bob Weinstein abbreviated U.S. release, was actually a pretty good movie and a pretty good adaptation of Bram Stoker's The Jewel of the Seven Stars, which is not exactly to mummy movies what Dracula is to vampire movies, but it's close. Similarly, also shout-outs to Hammer's Blood from the Mummies.
Nope, that's it. That's all the time you have. We're going to go to break. We'll be right back.
Alrighty.
And we're back. Next up, we'll be talking about The Wolf of Snow Hollow, which tells the story of a small town dealing with what looks like a werewolf attack. It's written and directed by Jim Cummings, no relation to the voice actor, but I did notice that. The sheriff is an aging, retiring Robert Forster, whose son Jim Cummings is a teetering on the edge alcoholic. They deal with a string of horrific assaults on women, which seem to be perpetrated by a wolf in toxic masculinity. Also, a baby dies. This is comedy. Mm-hmm. This also happens to be Robert Forster's last film.
Yeah. It also stars second build Ricky Lindholm of Garfunkel and Oates, who I love.
Yeah,
I was really happy to see.
I love her so much.
She was my favorite character.
She was the best character in the movie. She plays
absolutely.
Because the main character was not.
No.
I didn't know what to make of this movie. Nobody told me this was supposed to be a comedy.
It wasn't, though.
I
took
it
was funny, but it's not a comedy.
I took it more as a funny horror movie, and kind of went into it with that mindset in the first place.
It was definitely marketed as a comedy.
There were entire scenes that were
Yeah.
the rhythms of the scenes were of a comedy, but there were no jokes. Like, not that there were unfunny jokes, there weren't jokes.
It's a comedy like Vampire's Kiss is a comedy.
No.
That's sort of the mindset that I was approaching it with. Not no other particular resemblance, but it's the comedy of abject raw nerves.
Well, I also feel like the timing was like a comedy, but the subject matter was nothing like a comedy.
The timing of the dialogue and the scenes were like supposed to like a comedy. I guess the joke was that he's always just yelling at every scene. He just starts yelling at everybody.
Yeah,
I guess
anger
that's supposed
issues,
to be
yeah.
funny. But it opens with him. I guess he's an AA or anger management, one of those two. I
believe. Yeah.
So
he does say how long he's been sober.
So I was taking his outburst seriously, but it happened every single scene. So I was like, "Is this supposed to be funny?" I mean, it did get funnier as it went along. I thought it picked up steam a little bit.
That scene with the AA meeting, they had the audio engineer working on overtime just to make it seem like there were more than two people in that room.
Yeah, no, like I say, this feels like one of those movies that did not have a lot of budget, but every cent of it ended up on screen. I really, really like this movie, especially revisiting it now after having seen the movie that Cummings did subsequently, which is called The Beta Test. It's currently on Hulu, and I cannot recommend that highly enough. Again, in the spirit of a utterly nerve-annihilating satire. Not least because Cummings, who is the lead again in that one, it has one of the most amazing monologues right at the climax of the movie. If you have Hulu, it's free. Definitely give it a look. Now, Cummings is somebody that I am now paying attention to. I still haven't seen his first feature, which was an apparently fairly highly acclaimed film called Thunder Road, where he also played a nerve-frayed cop. But I need to go back and give that one a look, just because the writing in this and the beta test is so sharp. I think it's one of those things where they'll put three, what in a normal movie would be a laugh line, by you before you have a chance to react to the first one. It's simultaneously breathless staccato and deadpan, which is a very tough juggling act to pull off, I think.
On the other side of things, I fucking hated this movie.
Oh no!
I did. I hated it. It felt.
I had a feeling it would.
Yeah.
What's your idea?
I mean,
I had forgotten about the joke about the kid dying.
yeah, ha 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 ha. That was funny. This is all so funny. Domestic violence is so hilarious. Let's do a comedy about it. It's bizarre to me. It's a bizarre take on a feminist message that is worn right there on the surface, and manages to instead be violent towards women in an operatic way. It's this love. It's kind of like, it reminds me of the horror people who would look at this movie and say that's a good kill. There are people who say that's a good kill in this movie.
No one would say that about this movie because none of the kills are on screen. None of the kills are on screen.
There's some
They're
like
all
flailing
after the
and
fact.
there's like some flailing and screaming and a little bit of fur.
There's flailing, screaming,
that,
a little
one
POV
arm
of the
getting
camera coming in,
bit
but there's
off.
no actual on-screen gore. There's nothing to see.
But the way that the scene is structured, the way that it's intercut and frantic, it's played violently.
Yeah.
And that kind of violence comes across within the kills. Even if they don't have gore showing, it's still an incredibly violent assault on women. And it's very clearly that's what it's about. They say so within the movie. I mean, the final line, fresh meat, and he stops and just thinks for a moment there. That's us, like, supposed to reflect on ourselves as a society and how we treat women. That's what it looks like to me.
That's not what I got from this film at all. I thought it was
But it's
much
a
more
comedy.
I thought it was much more of a contemplation of this guy's disintegration. But at the same time, it is such an unsympathetic portrayal. I was very surprised. I mean, I assumed this was coming from Andy as a recommendation. And I was very surprised because you've spoken in the past about films in which you found yourself without any sympathy for the main character, completely asympathetic main character, which is where I was throughout this entire film, because I didn't like him at the start, and I liked him less and less as it went on.
Yeah, that was kind of the point, I thought.
I like it. Like
Yeah.
I was enamored of the way that they wrote and the way that Cummings played a character that you keep wanting to just kind of shake and slap the taste out of.
Ricky Lindholm was the hero the whole time.
Yeah.
He
But we
was
weren't following.
not.
Yeah, she wasn't presented as the hero. I mean,
She wasn't, but that was sort of the whole point. Is it was about a very bad guy who did, a terrible job only because he wanted to. I don't know.
As he himself says,
get his mom back or something. I don't.
As he himself says to one of the other cops at this point, is "You are bad at your job," which is a little bit of the pot calling the kettle black.
Absolutely.
there is a deeply self-laceratory quality to this that I actually kind of vibed with.
I mean, I had a problem with his performance. I mean, he was either a weird, off-putting robot who didn't seem to know how to speak words, or he would just be yelling. Like he seemed to have two modes, and I never really bought him as a character. I never thought about what this person was going through as a human being. It just didn't occur to me because the performance was strange to me, and
it did try to make you think about that, though. It did present it in a couple of ways, trying to show you the stresses in his life, which have apparently been hanging over him for the last decade or more, between his father's disintegrating health status, his trying to raise a daughter. But there was no point at which this made him sympathetic, because there were distinct opportunities where it could have made him sympathetic, where he comes across his daughter having been injured in one of the attacks, and his immediate response is, "How can you do this to me?" There was such a selfish response that I thought it went past comedy and straight into...
And she called him on it.
Yeah, she asked him, aren't you going to see if
which...
I'm okay? And he's like, no, or something.
Exactly.
Well, no, he didn't say no. He had a sudden realization that maybe his priorities are completely out of whack. But there was no point at which they made the character sympathetic in the fact that he's having a mental breakdown throughout the film.
Yeah, I mean, from the first moment he's on screen, he's having a mental breakdown.
And I got that, and I would be sympathetic if it wasn't for the fact that his mental breakdown made him the worst asshole in the world.
Yeah. There's no denying that. I still actually did like the movie. I don't think hey, look, I noticed that basically they were trying to, Ricky Lindholm was, good, and her character was good. Julie something Faulkner. I can't remember. Anyway, she was, the one when he asked her, has this been happening since what do you say? Since the Dark Ages? And she just looked at him like, how can you not know? I mean, and the whole thing about that girl, the skier walking to her car at night in the dark alone. We don't do that. We don't.
Especially not with headphones in.
Yes, especially not with headphones in. I mean, that was the one big mistake. But then again, I guess she thought she was in a small town, maybe, but I just think it was poor writing. But, there are awful, horrible guys out there that just have no idea what it's like.
And that's definitely...
That's very self-centered. Yeah. And he lost everything. He lost everything. He lost his daughter's respect. He lost his job.
And he deserved to.
And he did. And that's why I thought it was just fine. Because, he almost got killed, and that would have been good, but I don't think it would have been enough of a lesson.
I'm a little unclear on how he survived.
I took it as one of those movies that is a lot wittier than it is funny, so to speak. Cummings himself I took as a character who is just kind of inherently bad. He's awful. He's the worst. But he is desperately trying to be a good, a good son, a good father, a good cop. He's just not good at any of those things. I derive a measure of entertainment out of this. Again, as I say, I've seen this twice now. I really liked it both times. The beta test, particularly for his for his monologue right near the end, where he is again playing an absolutely appalling character who ends up kind of being okay at the end, is still kind of amazing. The guy's kind of developing a particular niche as I say, a walking raw nerve. Somebody who is just waiting to explode at any given time. But as far as I've seen, he's actually really good at it. Again, that's one of those distinct individual mileage will vary things. I could easily see not being able to spend an hour and 40 minutes in the company of this consummate jerk, to borrow a phrase that I ganked from Roger Ebert describing Harrison Ford in the Mosquito Coast. It's like it's a brilliant performance, so brilliant in fact that we cannot stand to spend 2 hours in the company of this consummate jerk. Um, but no, somehow I find this interesting just because the writing is so freaking sharp.
I
It
disagree about that.
yeah.
I really do. I think that the child death in it was an
That
immature
was
filmmaker doing an immature thing to look more interesting than he had any right to.
it was unnecessary, and but they could have just written it as just another lady,
Yeah.
no kid involved,
Yeah.
and
To
it would
to
have
step
been.
over that line is a very deliberate choice. And
Hmm.
I do not respect it at all. Cuz if you're going to do it for a laugh, it's not very funny. If you're going to do it for shock, it's not super shocking cuz you don't even show anything. It's just used for some perplexing reason to push the plot forward in
More tension.
yeah.
But I thought that was the whole point of the movie was tension. But you're right. I wish they had left that completely out of it. That
I,
was unnecessary. And
there was a moment early on in the film that was absolutely chilling to me, and looking back on it, I think it was meant to be a joke. I think during the first crime scene, Robert Forster repeatedly asks if there was evidence of sexual abuse, and then the investigator answers, that part of the crime scene is missing, which was absolutely horrifying to me. I think that was supposed to be funny. Or I think that was...
really,
Yeah, no, it
That's
was
the thing
supposed
is,
to be
I
funny.
think it's supposed to be both.
I didn't think it
Right.
was funny at all.
I
But
didn't
I
either,
just thought
but
it was.
thinking back on it, thinking back on the movie, I was like, I think that's the where the humor was pitched at in this movie. I mean, I didn't hate this movie. I thought it was okay.
Yeah,
it was
I'm
only
not-
85 minutes long. I'm fine with it, but um, I I mean, I did have a lot of problems with it, but I thought the comedic angle, which I think was more emphasized than maybe we thought, or just looking back on it, it seemed more emphasized than it was when I was watching it, and it just the comedic stuff just didn't work for me for the most part. The one joke I liked was again him being a complete asshole. Someone waking him up in the library, he immediately wakes up and yells "fuck you." that to me was funny, but
That made me
also
That was
laugh.
appropriate. I mean, that's what I think anybody would do, but especially somebody with anger and addiction issues.
If I was a lesser cop, you might have been shot.
yeah, he threatened the librarian for waking up. He's oh, if you could give me spooky books and then wake me up. I mean, that line was kind of funny. The thing about the spooky books and then being woken up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I hadn't seen a trailer for this first, I think I would have caught the comedy early on, but the trailer
I did
made
not.
this look like it was going to be a fun romp, like a
I didn't.
hilarious comedy
Aw.
werewolf movie, like
Oh.
like it was going to be a hardcore werewolf movie, but also funny, and so fun horror comedy time, and it's not. It's
Oh, no.
not at all. I find no humor in the thing. It just. Say
So
so.
I
No,
Clearly
go
my
ahead.
actions are running on an extreme axis here.
So I wanted to ask your opinion of the editing style at the moments
Oh.
of stress in this. So it starts out. There's a couple of scenes that the editing is very obvious. It's straight. I don't have the terminology because I didn't go to film school, but the bit where he's under stress and we get the slow pull into the cabinet over the stove. Obviously, okay, that's where he keeps his liquor. We find that out later, etc., etc. But there were moments in there where I got actively confused about what precisely was happening, and there is one sequence in particular, which we're past the spoiler point, I assume,
Yeah.
where
Now we are.
it cuts in sections of the junkie who is preparing is preparing to inject his heroin. He's preparing to do this and that or the other, and it keeps focusing on his preparations and contrasting them with the cop's preparations to draw a parallel between these two individuals to say that the cop is like the killer. But it turns out that wasn't the killer. He was
Red herring.
entirely unrelated to anything that's going on. So what are we to do with that, just story-wise?
It reminded me of Murder by Death. When they talk about at the end, Truman Capote is saying, you all come in with your you can't even guess who the killer is because you don't find out key evidence until the last page of the book, and you can't follow along. All your books are terrible, and it reminded me of that in that that character we were led to believe was the killer. The entire point of the character was to lead us to believe he was the killer. They drop the taxidermy guy into what, one other scene? And he's just
Maybe.
cross-cut with a lot of other people.
I didn't
Yeah.
even remember him. I was like, who is this guy?
Yeah, I remembered him.
It's
It's
like,
not a whodunit that you can actually
Yeah.
solve.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is a key item in a good mystery, is that you can actually solve it. And I find that lame.
It's also not a police procedural because the evidence we are given is given in such a spastic and piecemeal fashion. It sort of had me flailing to figure out what was the movie. What is this?
It's kind
and
of a character
a
study
character
of somebody
portrait.
you want to punch.
It's a character portrait of a guy whose mental state is disintegrating over the course of the film. So we're focused on him the entire time, which makes all of the other aspects around it fade into the distance. I mean, yes, there are feminist themes about the point that you brought up about the do women have to deal with this all the time, and the final line of the film and all that, absolutely present, totally a theme, but not the main theme. The main theme is this asshole over here and his disintegrating mental state. And it's not even really a werewolf movie.
It's actually a backdoor adaptation of one of the seminal pieces of werewolf literature, which itself is not actually a werewolf story because it has the same kind of denouement that this does, which was a story from 1939 by one Geoffrey Household called Taboo, which I had read previously and consequently kind of recognized it. Again, a relatively loose adaptation, but that's kind of the closest direct antecedent that I can point to for it. But in that regard, it's still the closest that we've ever actually had to an adaptation of that rather amazing story. But again, yeah, no, you're quite right. It's mostly a character study of a guy that you want to punch for different reasons from moment to moment. Just in the spirit of abject gallows humor, again, I really appreciated it in that regard. I seem to have liked this more than everybody else.
No, I was there with you. Honestly, I liked it too. But then again, I had seen it, so I kind of knew where it was going, and I can't really remember my reaction the first time, but I think I liked it.
Yeah, I think you liked it. I think I liked it better on second viewing. I would be hard pressed to point to why.
Well, I can tell you what I really liked about it was the way it would wind you up. I mean,
Yes.
just the tension building, characters looking slowly at the camera, and these long takes of him just howling at the ambulance, the EMTs and stuff, but unbroken. Kind of amazing.
It recalls one of my favorite dialogue exchanges. Do I make you nervous? You would make an itch nervous.
It is absolutely nerve destroying. But I think I think the things that we would laugh at that wasn't necessarily funny was simply a tension break. The tension's broken, and we can relax for a second, and it comes out as laughter. I mean, there were certainly things in there I would never laugh about, but some of his dialogue delivery would be like,
it's
hold
really,
on, wait a minute, and I'd find myself laughing.
It's really the dialogue that sings to me in this. The dialogue is such an extraordinary and precisely modulated collection of things that nobody in their right mind should ever fucking say to anyone else ever. You don't see a lot of movies that are written like this. It has kind of a unique syntax. It has a unique rhythm to it, that again, as I say, really sang to me. It's kind of written the way that I would like to write a horror movie. It's a horrifying situation. It's an absolutely appalling situation. Again, the people are being sort of unself-consciously funny. Funny things are happening. People are having funny responses, but fundamentally, it's deriving wit out of a nightmare situation.
I just can't find humor in domestic violence. I lived through it. I don't want to experience it on a funny level. I'm not going to laugh in a tension-breaking way with it. It's just going to be awful. And that's how I felt watching the film, is just awful.
At the same time, the scene where our protagonist's daughter was just trying to get him to go the fuck to bed was still absolutely heartbreaking. The whole thing is there's a weird layer of sincerity under the kind of artificial construction to the whole thing that I still found fairly affecting. But I can understand this not being the sort of meal you want to make. Absolutely, it's definitely a not for all tastes sort of movie.
Absolutely, and it's good that Nate is putting it out there, his opinion on this, because I guess it isn't for everybody, and it's good he's warning everybody that might have those triggers, especially people who've dealt with addiction, or people in their family with addiction. It is hard. It is absolutely difficult in those areas, and I'll agree to that because I've done that, but I still managed to find some enjoyment, and that's it. So, but I absolutely respect everybody's opinion who did not like it, and so go if you're gonna watch it. Watch it with those.
How should you approach it if you're going to watch it? I went into it literally knowing nothing other than the cover. I knew the title. I knew it was spoken about. I don't even know the context in which it was spoken about. I did not see a trailer beforehand. I did not realize this was a comedy until we started talking.
It's a movie about trauma that also has horror movie stuff in it.
Mm-hmm. So how should you approach it?
As a movie about trauma that also has some horror movie stuff in it, and some very funny writing, or very witty writing, delivered in a very strange way. Again, it's going to be a hard one to brace anybody for.
Yeah.
I think they could have done a better job with the marketing.
They could have done a better job in the marketing, but how in the fuck do you actually sell this movie in the first place?
Not as a comedy.
Well, that's the thing is, it's not a comedy. It's not really a normal horror movie. It's closer to being a horror comedy than it is to any other recognizable substrain of picture.
Just call it a horror film. That's it. It's just a horror drama.
That's what I approached it as. Yeah.
That may be a fair approach. Of course, then the ones who are doing the kill count, get annoyed that there are all of these, funny dialogue lines and edits and that sort of thing.
That shit's in all horror movies now.
I was about to say it occurred. That sounded stupid coming out of my mouth. Forget it.
Well, I want to compare it a little bit to Wolf Cop, because
Wolf Cop is broad. This is not a broad.
I understand that. That's what I'm trying to point out is that you go into it knowing it's funny, but of course, same thing. Your Wolf Cop, there is nothing likable about that guy. Not one thing. He's awful. But you do go in.
The movie plays
knowing it's ridiculous, and it stays ridiculous.
Exactly. Anti-hero cops are definitely a thing at this point.
This is possibly the least likable cop since the first Bad Lieutenant. This is a bad cop who does bad things.
And even he had his redemptive moments
at the end. This guy's redemptive moment was when he did actually have the presence of mind to spot the killer when he was sitting across from him at the table for 15 minutes doing an interview, and eventually figured out that maybe this is the guy who's been killing people.
But the right woman for the job figured it out 10 minutes earlier.
And also, of course, to follow through on his promise to keep shooting until he could see the ground through his head.
I liked the boyfriend. I liked that character, that actor. I liked that actor.
The guy from American Vandal.
Yeah.
The big beefy guy.
Yeah.
I couldn't pick out who he was. Then I looked him up. I'm like, oh yeah, American Vandal. He's the guy who everyone thought did the dicks. That's how they phrase it on that show.
I watched 10 minutes of that. I hated it. Never turned it on again.
So. I never made the connection there.
I liked that show.
No, he was again the acting in this. Unless you want to take fault with Jim Cummings specifically for having constructed for himself such a freaking odd role in the first place, really can't be faulted. I mean, can we have a moment for this being the last role of the great Robert Forster?
Yeah.
And he is, absolutely beautiful in his screen time in this, as somebody who is just kind of struggling to maintain the existence that he has been maintaining for as long as anybody in the movie can remember. Again, absolutely beautiful piece of acting, a very sort of elegiac swan song to have as his last performance.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, Ricky Lindholm is fantastic. Basically, all of the supporting characters are, played fairly beautifully, given that a number of them are kind of inherently dicks. The medical examiner is an interesting mix of jerk and don't give a fuck. Kind of in the way that medical examiners are very often played. It's something that somebody actually calls them on in this case. I thought in this case that he was actually every bit the dick that Jim Cummings' character thought that he was. It's a weird movie. I suppose that's kind of the takeaway here is any way you slice it, it is a strange conjury of things. Again, I absolutely think that it works. I can absolutely see being seriously cheesed off or triggered by it, though.
I also didn't like the editing.
Hey?
But the photography was freaking fantastic.
Whoever did the grade on it was just like I don't understand the color grading of that movie. It's so flat.
So what about the editing? Because again, I don't really have the language to sort of describe it.
There's a kind of when you go from a shot from one person to the next and you're not overlapping their audio, you're going from one take to the next, or it's just dialogue, then dialogue, then dialogue, then dialogue. You need to keep those edits a little shorter to make sure that the conversation continues flowing. The edits on this had a lot of room to breathe. So somebody would say something and it would be like 3 beats too long, and then go to the next one, be 3 more beats, and then the other person would start talking. And that editing bugged the shit out of me. Just throughout the entire movie, it kept happening.
I kind of took that as a deliberate stylism.
I hated it. It was so jarring and just annoying, and it killed my editing brain. It made it very unhappy.
You were offended on a story level, on a technical level, on a professional level. No.
Well, maybe you in fact should not see the beta test.
Yeah, maybe.
I'll watch it with you, babe. It'll be fine.
So, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I was going to close out the show. If you have something else to say, go for it.
I came into this thinking it was a straight horror movie, and for at least the first 20, 30 minutes of it or so, I thought that the little bits that I interpreted as gory or gallows humor, the description of the first crime scene and things like that, I thought it was a bad taste moment on the part of the characters within a horror drama that I was watching through, and I kept expecting to get to the point where we would like have a werewolf movie in here, and we don't. So I may have come into it with completely the wrong expectations, and the character himself, I should have an immense amount of sympathy for, just because I'm finding myself at the moment with a lot, and we're not going into it, but a lot of external stressors, and I just got through a spate of about 4 days of insomnia. So I'm been at that frayed edge for a while, but in every way in which he responded, while realistic, just made me hate him. If this movie had a car, I would key it. So
Yes, actually, I love that.
I'm going to go
I
with,
know
in this
that-
case, that's what they're going for.
yeah, and I get that, and I should be totally open to that. Because I've said before, I like stories about characters that are awful, characters that I hate. I like non-traditional stories. I love
You should
stories
see the
told
beta
in
test.
non-traditional ways. But this movie just kept making me hate this main character, so that I was not enjoying the fact the movie was about him. I wanted to watch the werewolf movie that was going on in the background, that we got a few glimpses of here and there. And at the end, we get an action scene that felt so out of place because something was happening. And I don't hate this movie. I like it for being something unique. If I came up with the perfect pairing for this, I could probably love this movie in a double feature. I don't know what that would be right now. And I'd have to think about it as something that would throw into contrast everything within this film and put a different perspective on it. But I'm not there yet, so I can't say I would recommend this movie to anybody.
Werewolves Within would be an almost perfect palate cleanser after this.
Which I haven't seen yet. So
it's everything that you were missing on that. So
our hero is so freaking lovable, even... Well, I don't want to go into spoilers.
Yeah, he's wonderful.
He is wonderful.
And a policeman. So
I had my problems with that movie, but the main character's great.
Yeah, park ranger or something to that extent.
Okay. Yeah, that's what it was.
But yeah,
That's
but would make for a very sharp palate cleanser to this.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for us here on What's on the Pile. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at What's on the Pile. You can find us on YouTube under the Punch Bunny YouTube channel, or you can visit our website, whatsonthepile.com. Thanks for hanging out.